The freezing mud splashed across Chloe's worn boots as her woven basket violently hit the ground. Hundreds of meticulously freeze-dried wild berries scattered into the filthy storm drain. The regional purchasing director stood over her, his expensive leather shoes completely out of place in the remote mountain outpost. He pointed a thick finger at her face, laughing cruelly at the way she struggled to balance on her bad leg. He told her she was nothing but a crippled beggar, who had absolutely no right to negotiate prices with a massive corporation. He threatened to bulldoze her paralyzed grandmother's cabin if she did not hand over the rights to the mountain slope by tomorrow morning. Chloe swallowed her bitter tears and dropped to her knees in the freezing rain, desperately trying to salvage the ruined fruit. She did not know that a man in a tattered delivery jacket was watching the entire scene from the shadows of the post office awning. His name was Arthur. He was not a struggling courier trying to make ends meet. He was the billionaire founder of the nationwide organic supermarket chain that the arrogant director worked for. And those crushed berries in the mud were the only surviving biological specimens that could save his company's $20 million winter contract. But Arthur stayed completely silent, pulling his little girl closer to shield her from the wind. He adjusted the hidden camera pinned to his jacket collar. He needed to see exactly how far his corrupt manager would go, to understand how they got to this miserable afternoon. We have to look back at the quiet life Chloe had built on the mountain. Chloe was not born with a limp. 5 years ago, she had thrown herself into the path of a flash flood to pull a stranded hiker out of a collapsing ravine. The heavy debris had crushed her right leg, leaving her with a permanent, painful limp. She never regretted it, but the physical limitation made it incredibly hard to find steady work in a rugged logging town. Her only motivation in life was her elderly grandmother, who was entirely paralyzed by a severe nervous system disease caused by the extreme cold. The medical bills were a constant, suffocating weight on Chloe's narrow shoulders, but she was smart, incredibly resourceful, and deeply connected to the harsh nature around her. She had spent years perfecting a manual freeze-drying technique for the rare wild berries that grew uniquely on her small plot of land. Her method retained 100% of the vitamins and natural sugars, creating a product that modern factories could not replicate without using dangerous chemicals. That was exactly what Arthur's company was desperately searching for. His logistics empire was facing a massive crisis because their artificial drying methods kept destroying the crop yields. Arthur had received reports of a miraculous local supplier, but the regional director had consistently lied in his paperwork. The director claimed he had invented the process himself and was just waiting to secure the land to build a massive processing plant. He never mentioned that the genius behind the formula was a disabled orphan trying to keep her grandmother alive. For weeks, the director had been squeezing Chloe, refusing to pay her for the sample batches and deliberately isolating her from other buyers. He wanted her desperate enough to sign over the deed to the mountain slope for pennies. Chloe had warned him repeatedly that a severe temperature inversion was coming. She knew the sky, she knew the smell of the impending ice storms, and she warned him not to leave the company's equipment exposed. The director had just scoffed, calling her a superstitious hillbilly who needed to learn her place. He cared only about hitting his seasonal quota, so he could secure a massive year-end bonus from corporate headquarters. Arthur had flown in quietly under the radar, bringing his daughter along to teach her the value of ground-level hard work. He wanted to audit the regional supply chain with his own eyes before approving the multi-million-dollar expansion. What he found instead was a culture of toxic greed. As the afternoon wore on, the sky above the mountain turned a sickly shade of purple. The wind began to howl with a terrifying, hollow sound that shook the pine trees to their roots. The freak blizzard that Chloe had predicted finally slammed into the mountain with devastating force. Visibility dropped to zero in a matter of seconds. Panic erupted outside the post office as the sudden whiteout blinded everyone in the courtyard. The cowardly director did not hesitate for a single second. He shoved his own workers out of the way, hijacked the only company transport truck, and sped down the mountain road to save himself. He left his crew, the locals, and the undercover CEO completely stranded in the deadly cold. In the chaos of the stampede, Arthur's grip slipped for just a fraction of a second. His little girl was swept away by the terrified crowd, tumbling blindly toward the edge of the steep, unstable ravine. Arthur screamed her name, but the roaring wind swallowed his voice entirely. He tried to run after her, but a massive snowdrift collapsed, blocking his path with a wall of solid ice. He was trapped on the upper ridge, desperately clawing at the frozen earth, watching helplessly as his daughter slid further down the crumbling slope. That was when Chloe moved. She did not stop to think about her bad leg, or the excruciating pain shooting through her joints. She tied a thick loading rope around her waist, anchored it to a sturdy steel post, and threw herself over the edge into the blinding snow. The rocks tore at her clothes and cut into her skin as she dragged her body down the treacherous incline. She could barely see, but she could hear the faint, terrified cries of a child. Chloe used her strong arms to compensate for her weak leg, fighting against the gravity and the shifting mud. She reached the little girl, just as the ledge beneath her tiny boots began to give way. Chloe lunged forward, grabbing the back of the child's coat and pulling her tightly against her own chest. She curled her body around the girl, taking the brunt of the falling rocks on her own back. Inch by agonizing inch, Chloe pulled them both back up the rope, her hands bleeding and her muscles screaming in protest. When they finally breached the top, Arthur was still trapped behind the ice wall, watching through a narrow gap with tears freezing on his face. He saw the disabled girl, the one his director had just thrown into the mud, wrap his precious daughter in her own dry coat. Chloe did not know whose child this was, and she did not care. She carried the shivering girl through the blinding storm, fighting her way back to the safety of her small, warm cabin. Inside, she quickly fired up her manual thermal stoves, the very same ones she used to dry her precious berries. She wrapped the child in thick thermal blankets and fed her hot, nutrient-rich berry soup to stabilize her body temperature. Arthur managed to dig himself out an hour later, fighting his way through the storm to reach the cabin window. He looked inside and saw his daughter sleeping peacefully by the fire, safe and completely unharmed. He saw Chloe sitting on the floor, quietly rubbing her injured leg, looking exhausted, but deeply relieved. Arthur did not knock on the door right away. He stood in the freezing wind, his heart full of an overwhelming, profound gratitude. He pressed the button on his hidden camera, ensuring the footage of the director's cowardice was securely saved to the cloud. The storm raged on through the night, but the real battle was going to start the moment the sun came up. The morning sun finally broke through the heavy clouds, reflecting off a landscape completely buried in white. The mountain outpost was a disaster zone, the company's expensive processing warehouse, which the director had left wide open to the elements, was completely destroyed. Millions of dollars worth of industrial heating equipment and raw product were buried under 3 feet of solid ice. Down the mountain road, a convoy of heavy utility vehicles finally pushed through the snowdrifts. Leading them was the regional director, sitting comfortably in the passenger seat of a local police cruiser. He had spent the night in a luxury hotel down in the valley, drinking hot coffee while his crew froze. But when he saw the absolute devastation of the warehouse, his face went completely pale. He knew corporate would demand an investigation, and he would be held financially liable for the negligence. His greedy mind immediately scrambled for a scapegoat. He looked up the hill and saw smoke rising from Chloe's small, battered cabin. A malicious smile spread across his face. He ordered the police officers to follow him, marching straight through the snow toward her door. Chloe was outside, carefully trying to shovel snow away from her grandmother's medical exhaust vent. She looked exhausted, her injured leg trembling from the brutal exertion of the previous night. The director did not even say good morning. He grabbed her by the shoulder and violently shoved her against the wooden siding of the cabin. He pointed wildly at the ruined warehouse below, screaming at the top of his lungs for the officers to hear. He accused her of breaking into the facility during the storm to steal equipment. He claimed she had intentionally sabotaged the temperature controls out of spite, because he refused to buy her worthless berries. He demanded that the officers arrest her immediately and seize her property to cover the corporate damages. Chloe was stunned, shaking her head as the cold handcuffs were pulled out by a hesitant deputy. She tried to explain that she had been inside all night, taking care of a lost child, but her voice was weak from the cold. The director laughed in her face, calling her a pathetic liar. He said no one in their right mind would leave a child out in a blizzard. And she was just trying to buy time. He stepped forward, raising his hand to slap her across the face to force a confession. But his hand never connected. A strong, calloused grip caught his wrist in midair, squeezing the bones so hard the director let out a high-pitched gasp. Arthur stepped out from the shadow of the cabin porch. He was still wearing the cheap, torn courier jacket, but the look in his eyes was absolutely terrifying. His little girl was standing right behind him, holding a warm mug of berry tea, wearing one of Chloe's oversized, knitted sweaters. The director yanked his hand away, rubbing his bruised wrist while sneering at Arthur. He told the delivery boy to back off, before he had him thrown in a jail cell right next to the crippled thief. Arthur did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his torn pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, wirelessly syncing it to the local police cruiser's dashboard monitor. Suddenly, the high-definition audio and video from Arthur's hidden lapel camera began playing on the cruiser's external speaker system. The entire courtyard went dead silent. They heard the howling wind of the blizzard. They saw the exact moment the whiteout hit, and they watched, in crystal-clear quality, as the regional director shoved his own workers to the ground. They saw him steal the only transport truck and speed away, leaving everyone to die. Then, the footage cut to the steep ravine. The officers gasped as they watched Chloe, dragging her bad leg, throw herself over the edge to save a child she did not even know. The director's face drained of all color. He backed away, stammering, trying to say the video was somehow edited or taken out of context. He pointed at Arthur, demanding to know who this low-level spy thought he was. Arthur slowly unzipped the cheap courier jacket, letting it drop into the snow. Underneath, he was wearing a custom-tailored dark wool suit. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a solid black titanium corporate card. It was the master identification card for the entire logistics empire. Arthur looked the director dead in the eye and introduced himself as the founder, majority shareholder, and CEO of the company. The director's knees literally gave out. He collapsed into the snow, the arrogance completely wiped from his trembling face. He tried to apologize, crying and begging for his job, swearing he was just trying to protect the company's bottom line. Arthur did not show a single ounce of pity. He looked at the police officers and calmly instructed them to arrest the man. He cited charges of grand theft of a company vehicle, reckless endangerment of a minor, and falsifying corporate documents. The handcuffs that were meant for Chloe were swiftly slapped onto the director's wrists. He was dragged away, sobbing uncontrollably, his career and his life completely over. Arthur turned around and walked over to Chloe, who was still leaning against the cabin, completely overwhelmed. He gently picked up one of her freeze-dried berries from a small jar on the porch. He tasted it, closing his eyes as the pure, intense flavor of the mountain hit his senses. It was perfect. It was exactly what his $20 million winter contract needed. He looked at Chloe, not with pity, but with profound respect. He told her that her manual process was brilliant, and her heart was even rarer. He didn't just offer to buy her land. He offered her the position of Chief Quality Director for the entire national organic supply chain. He promised to build a state-of-the-art medical facility right there in the valley, ensuring her grandmother would receive the best care in the world without ever having to leave her home. Chloe covered her mouth, tears of pure relief finally falling down her cheeks. Fast forward 2 years later, the mountain outpost was no longer a struggling, impoverished town. It was the thriving epicenter of the most successful organic brand in the country. Chloe walked through the pristine, warm greenhouse, her limp barely noticeable after receiving proper physical therapy. She smiled brightly as Arthur walked through the doors, holding the hand of his daughter, who immediately ran over to hug Chloe tightly. They stood together under the glass roof, watching the northern lights dance across the winter sky. Life has a funny way of testing us in the darkest, coldest moments. Sometimes, the people society overlooks the most are the ones holding the key to our survival. When you choose to offer warmth in the middle of a bitter storm, the universe will always find a way to reward you with a life more beautiful than you could have ever imagined. If you believe that true courage and kindness will always defeat arrogance and greed, hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community, and let these stories remind you that the good guys still win.